Hi, I'm Kent Nerburn, and my book, The Wolf at Twilight, won the Minnesota Book Award for 2010 in the field of creative nonfiction. The Wolf at Twilight is a strange book. In fact, it was such a strange book, and it's such a strange genre that it falls somewhere between fiction and nonfiction. We didn't even quite know where to put it. It's the story of my travels with an elderly Lakota man trying to help him find out what happened to his sister who was lost in the boarding school system. And so it's a little bit of a mystery, a little bit of a road book. It's very assiduously researched oral history and history of the boarding schools and some measure of spiritual teaching from the Native point of view. So it's an odd duck, as it were. It's very important for me that the Native people who read the book say, yes, this is the way it is. And yet, I want to get readers who are not necessarily interested in Native subjects. I want to tell a story that will draw them in and lead them into knowledge about something that they might not have had any interest in learning about or thought they had no interest in learning about. So the challenge was finding that balance between an authentic voice that would meet the standards of Native people and at the same time be interesting enough to the non-Native reader to have them seek it out. My process really is to catch a voice and follow it as long as it feels like I'm inside of that voice and speaking from within that voice rather than trying to figure out what the next sentence is that I'm trying to say. I talk about it as trying to go into a garden where I get to look around and figure out what's going on rather than pushing a stone up a hill. When I feel like I'm pushing a stone up a hill, I stop. So there will be days when I write for 6, 8, 10 hours, and very often I'm always writing in my head. I'm always carrying a piece of paper, or I've got something, I'll run and write something down. Sometimes I'll write late at night. And as the book shapes itself, my writing process shapes itself, and I end up writing more and more in a more and more structured fashion. But really, I don't rewrite. I shouldn't say I don't rewrite. I may have 10 versions of something, but each of them is a finished version, and then I pick the one that works the best, because it's all a matter of voice. And if I get the voice right, then it usually is, niggling with it doesn't make it any better. So that's really my writing process, is sitting down and trying to tell stories, find a voice, and make sure that I believe what I'm saying. I never set out to be a writer. I'm one of those rare people who thought that, didn't have this dream that my life would be utterly fulfilled if I got a book published. I set out to be a sculptor and was trained in sculpture and was making a living, albeit not a very good one, as a sculptor of large figurative pieces. I got my doctorate in theology and art and was working in roughly defined religious sculpture. But all through from high school on in graduate school, I wrote. I wrote as a way to make a living. I worked on the Minnesota Daily, I worked on the Ivory Tower, the campus magazine. I wrote government documents. I worked as a writer for the Governor's Crime Commission. It was like someone who just played scales and never tried to make any music. And I'd always made a living as a writer, but my real concern was sculpture and the study of American culture. And so when the opportunity came to write a book, and it came because one of my sculpture, I had a large sculptural commission, and it ended up, in my mind, being a mighty labor for the birth of a mouse. And I said, I don't have it in this field. I'm sometimes great, but I'm not always good. But I like writing, and I'd had that opportunity to do the oral history project on the Red Lake Reservation, and just approached actually a friend of mine who ran a publishing company and said, can I try writing something for you? And so I had a slip in the back door, and I started writing, and because it's always been easy for me, suddenly I was able to not just play scales, but I was able to compose music as a writer. My dad had a job working for the disaster service of the Red Cross. So in my into my little suburban life came these unbelievable events. He'd come and wake me up at say, 2 in the morning and say, there's a fire on the north side. Do you want to go with me? Get taken out of bed and be taken with him to some horrible event where people maybe have been burned to death, or at minimum they'd lost all the things that they had. And I would have to sit in the car while he was doing whatever his responsibilities were and talk to these people and try to comfort them, or at least be present to them. And then we'd get done with this surreal event, and I'd go back home to my little bed in my little house and worry about whether I had the right pair of shoes to wear the next day, or whether some girl thought I was cool. And so it was a complete disjunction. And what that did is it made me into a watcher. And because their world, the worlds that I went into were more important than the worlds in which I lived. So I became, from an early age, a watcher and a recorder of the world around me, and a recorder of the emotional, these sort of emotional valences of people I was with. I had to get their emotional temperature and try to give something back to them as best I could. So that really became the source of a lot of my thinking about writing, about teaching, about anything I do, is try to find the heart of the matter. This urge to see through multiple points of view, I think in some ways is the gift of my Minnesota background and my Minnesota circumstance. We are in the middle. We're in the middle, and you look east, you look west, you look north, you look south, and it's different from all perspectives. I think that that's very much informed I know it informed my writing, because when I think of moving away from here, it frightens me to lose whatever that taproot is. I don't know who I'd be if I had to write, even in the Twin Cities. I'm a person of the North and the Northwest, but not the loons and canoes north so much as the huddling big winds, and delicious bleakness is the term that always comes to mind about where we live. And there's space in my writing. I leave a lot of space in my writing because of that. There isn't the interiority that comes from writing inside of rooms. It's an outdoors writer, and it's a writer of journeys. So if that's the Minnesota part, it may not be Minnesota per se, but that's what Minnesota has given me.